Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse, a show about art, culture, politics, and philosophy, now back with a true right and fully Nordic perspective. And today we are back in full swing with the art portion of our domain. We're going to be diving headfirst into the, I suppose, cozy and strange and at times slightly uncanny world of the Moomins, which is a product of artist and author Tove Jansson from Finland. But first I'll introduce both my co-host and our final guest, Ludwig Path. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So happy to be back again as usual. I've been a sort of Moomin nostalgia enjoyer, Moomin appreciator for a lot of my life, and it's going to be interesting to take a look back at it again, maybe from a bit more of an adult perspective, and also perhaps look at some of the politics and some of the cultural ideas implicated in this show.
Yes, I've been slightly black-pilled by going back and looking into the origins of a lot of my childhood enjoyments of Moomins.
Yeah, that's it's interesting you say that, because I remember in the run up to this, and when we did the polling, we talked about the based movements and the secret reactionary messaging, and then we just get onto watching the documentaries, and it's like, oh, oh God, oh
I
no,
do still think
no, please.
these values are present, but I've become convinced as I've been talking about that most of it might be accidental or vestiges from sort of Tove Jansson's parents. But to keep me on course is Berkarl, back again from Finland.
Good evening. And yes, I think the reliving the childhood things, you often run into these things getting ruined. But honestly, for me, this going back and looking at things, it hasn't been, in the case of Moomin, blackpilling at all. So
I'll say it like this.
I knew of Tove's, subversive side in her personal life.
Sure.
And so I didn't, get disturbed by that, and more, looking past that and looking at past the contemporary critics and what she was overtly trying to do, but what she actually did.
I do agree. I think Moomin is something that I would, without any issue, really be able to read to my children. And comparing to today's standards, it would be a lot better than anything contemporary.
Yeah, most certainly. It's much less ideological than things you get currently. I mean, in Norway right now, I don't know if you noticed, but this is a bit of a throwback to some of the older streams that we've done, is that they're doing the anniversary for the repealing of the paragraph 213, that is basically the sodomy law in Norway that I talked about on the LGBTQ stream. So you have that all over the place, that we're having 50-year anniversary. With the documentaries that I've seen as well on the Moomins, it is kind of tainted by this very modernist need to sort of psychologize and to put this kind of queer stuff into everything. But we can get more into that as we go on.
I think we will, and I find that very annoying, considering how transparent Tove has been in creating the Moomins, and how transparent some of the analogs are to her real life experiences. Recontextualizing them to serve a lot of this agenda is very insidious.
Most certainly, but it's just very easy picking for these people. They will do it with pretty much everything. So we should just keep that in mind as we go into it, and not try to do the same thing ourselves, like buying into her frame of just we have to accept this kind of leftist LGBTQ frame where everything has to be some symbolism for some type of homophobia or some socially unacceptable lifestyle, something like that. It's let's just try to do some appreciation and some conservation.
I'll do a quick round of parasocial engagement here. I see see the usual suspects in the chat: Monopathalmos, Nordanon, Maddie G. It's been a while since I've seen that name. And Yanner195, welcome. Hope you're gonna stick around and enjoy Moomin with us for a bit. So, I'm not sure if you guys have anything. We talked a bit before the stream if we wanted to talk about any current events, and the only thing that we found really worth talking about that wasn't too sad or too blackpilling, I suppose, is something like Elon Musk buying Twitter. But I'm not sure we have any good takes on that.
I'm just wondering how optimistic you guys are about it. I mean, for me, I'm almost a little bit scared to have hope.
The only difference I've noticed, and I use Twitter, but I don't use it that often, really. But I've noticed since this thing came out, I don't know what happened, if people are just happy and posting things just because they feel like they can now. But I've seen in my feed over the past couple of days, people, like when I see the names, I realized, oh, I haven't seen you in like a year because they've been like shadow banned or something, and suddenly they're back in my feed. That's the only thing I've noticed. Whether or not this is like a net good or net positive or net negative, I don't really know. I try to stay off Twitter as much as possible, but it keeps roping me back in for a bit.
Yeah, I think the basic pros and cons were gone through pretty well yesterday on Cigar Stream, for example. You know, there is going to be the big jump in engagement for, you know, the containment side of. There was this graph of, you know, the moment Elon Musk got the company under his control, and the follower counts of all U.S. senators broken down by Democrat and Republican, and the Democrats went down anywhere between 50 and 5%, and Republicans went up by, follower counts went up by 200% tops. I think Ted Cruz got 200% following.
Jesus. Yeah.
And, you know,
You really think someone would do that? Just, you know, control the political opinions on a big platform that most of your electorate uses?
My first reaction to this was, oh no, we're the containment is getting stronger, but
well, that's true.
I don't really know. Who knows at this point?
The only thing I could see be a sort of, people have been saying, you know, it's this is just they're just gonna use another measure of control. So now the legal stuff that Trump tried to get through with the holding social media to account is just going to be pushed through to allow them to control it directly via government power, and then we're back to square one, basically. And people feel like something happened, and then they're going to start believing in the system again. I think is the problem here, that it's gonna trick people back into believing, I guess.
Well, one thing is for sure, it's that the old boundaries are no longer there, and new ones are going to be redrawn. So some people will have to, you know, find these new boundaries on Twitter, and a few accounts may get banned, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Sure.
Yeah, I think a good part is that we can just get rid of all of these trash right-wing Twitter things like Truth Social and what's the other thing, Getter, and these kind of meaningless platforms.
Parler.
Yep.
Maddie G says, I can't see how just buying Twitter is Elon's endgame. It's going to bring him enormous trouble. It's not very profitable, and I don't think he's that altruistic. Well, people have been in have been invested in Twitter for a long time. Google still owns YouTube, even though it's never made them any money. So I think we're way past money being the incentive for owning these corporations. It's about control. It's about narrative.
I think for Elon, being as rich as he is, he has a lot invested in trying to control narrative around his company and these other ventures that he's getting into. Yeah. So he's probably going to use everything he has to sort of manipulate stock and other things through Twitter. But he'll probably find more creative ways of doing it than the people who currently run it as well, I would imagine.
Probably. Anyway, let's get on with the show. So, we'll start by talking generally about what this Moomin thing is. For those of you who are not from the Nordics, you probably, or I guess not from Europe, I think it's spread quite well in Europe. If you're from Japan, you're probably very familiar with this. But for most Americans, at least, you're gonna have a hard time recalling anything like Moomin. Now, Moomin, or the Moomin Valley, is a creation of the... Is this a self-portrait? Do you know that, Burkarl?
I'm not completely certain, but it might.
It looks like
it. Yeah, it might as well be. It's in her style.
Yeah, the woman in the picture here sitting with all these characters around her is Tove Jansson, a Swedish-speaking Finn, if I recall, who died in 2001. Is that true?
Yes, it's 2001, and I believe the correct term is Finno-Swede, because she's still ethnically Swede, so you have to have the primary as the latter.
I see. You're getting into the early life stuff already.
It's been 30 seconds and we're already I already saw someone post about physiognomy earlier. Well, she is the creator and artist behind the Moomins, these various characters you see here. Specifically, a Moomin is one of these like troll hippopotamus looking creatures, while the others are either unspecified or defined as something other than a Moomin. Now, what's interesting about the Moomin Valley is how much, and I mentioned this 5 minutes ago, how much of herself Tove has put into the creation of originally these children's books, but also the illustrations that she makes. And I think we'll get into that a bit later. But overall, it's something that all of us here on the panel remember fondly from my childhood. We came to the consensus that it's mostly from an animation, or I suppose it will be called an anime, seeing as it's a Japan-produced animation, that was made in the 1990s, that ran for quite a long time on European television. I also recall having a Moomin book that I got from, I think, my grandma or something like that when I was young. And it's something about the world she creates that is different from other children's media, in that she doesn't shy away from heavy topics. She doesn't shy away from the negative emotions as being part of life. She manages to weave them into the narrative in a way that doesn't scare the children necessarily, although sometimes there is scary imagery. But she's not afraid of challenging the reader.
Yes, and I think this comes from her being of a very young but still adult age during the World Wars, for example, and seeing all the young men of her age go and get killed.
Yes, and we'll get into that a bit later as well with some of her books and some of her family life. Now, what is a Moomin? I covered this quickly, but I also wanted to show this painting here because I think it's very beautiful. I like how she uses the lines. Supposedly this sort of style of drawing these cartoons was something she inherited from her mother, who used to do graphic artwork on the side, and she would paint or draw postcards in this sort of style. So this is something that she picked up on and used in a lot of her cartoon work, not in her art.
I think it was stamps, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, sorry, stamps. Sorry, yes. Stamps. I meant that. Yeah. Now, so the Moomin is this like hippopotamus troll creature here that she invented actually quite early in her life, it seems. She'd be drawing these characters all around the place, doing sort of tagging at times, I've been told, and also in her work as a political cartoonist, they served a lot of purpose there.
Yes, the first Moomin that she herself claims to have drawn was on the wall of an outhouse at one of her family's, some cottage residence. And the original first Moomins that she drew were actually, proper troll-like, black with red eyes, and this kind of stuff. But for the first novels and such, she cleaned them up to be the friendly children's characters.
And they were still a bit rough around the edges in the early novels that she created. They didn't become quite as round and lovable in that sense. Before I think the second book, she sort of like made them a bit more appealing.
So is this just an evolution of a kind of troll, or does this have a connection to what type of wildlife or nature in Finland that I'm not aware of?
Well, I think of course it's called a Moomin troll. So yes, it's some sort of evolution from, some grisly figure of a troll that she rounded out and made into this cuddly creature. And I think the original reference to a troll is from Swedish missionaries that came to Finland in, I don't remember exactly the century, I would have to look it up. But, I think it's something around the 12th century or so, 11th maybe. And they saw a person of the local populace coming out of the bushes, but he didn't quite look human. And the missionaries got very scared and ran to the bishop and said, Fintroll, Fintroll.
Yeah, that's a band as well. We didn't talk about it in the black metal stream. It's too far down on the
band, so.
Yep. No, but I thought that when we were talking about folk tales on the previous stream, that this is like the origin of the trolls. It's basically like looking at these kind of more pagan populations that just live close to nature, sort of unkept, uncivilized, and you see them, and that's kind of the caricature of them. But they do have, the Moomins seem to have this sort of, like Walrus said, this hippopotamus like design. So I wonder if that's just accidental, or if there's some connection to that.
Maybe. I haven't been able to find any sort of like clear sources on whether or not she did draw inspiration from a hippopotamus. We have inadvertently started an anime discussion in the chat by saying that the Moomins are an anime. They're an anime in the sense that you can call Japanese animation anime, but it's a joint Finnish-Japanese produced animation. So, call it what you want. And there's two of them, I think. One from the late 60s, early 70s, and the one from the 90s. And then there's several other either live action or puppet shows or later animated shows. I cannot vouch for anything later than the 1990s in terms of content. I see someone saying that it's a
Not
gateway
as
to
good.
transland, and it's probably been co-opted. I feel it's been something that I discovered doing research for the stream and looking back at it. When you start Googling things, you end up in these subcultures online who seem to have adopted a lot of the Moomin aesthetic, and a lot of this is very, very gay in all senses of the word. So there seems to have been some subversion going on.
Do you have any interesting insights from that subculture? I didn't look too much into it. I was a little scared.
Yes,
No.
I do.
Okay.
Finnish, and especially Fennoswede Twitter is full of these snuffkin eco-fash types. They have the vaporwave snuffkin and with
Right.
the black sun in the background.
Yeah, so if you're going hunting for Moomin stuff, just be careful, because suddenly you'll get like gay snuffkin fan fiction or something.
Oh, that way you mean? Oh,
yeah, it's kind of weird. Yeah.
The fast wave to gay snuffkin pipeline. I mean, for myself, my introduction to Moomin was also through the sort of 90s show. I mean, up until recently, I didn't know that there existed so many of these shows. And like you said, Walrus, I can't vouch if any of them were good or not. But I mean, the chat can ease up. It's not a degenerate show in any way, at least not that I've detected. It has some of the characteristic kind of Japanese drawing style, but it doesn't have any of the speed lines or the high school panties or any of this sort of weird shit that you get in the
no. This is a show for
animes.
children, and it's very, very light in that sense, and it's also the underlying reason to why my imagery of Moomin, looking back and to the books as well, were that, well, I remember it being quite traditional in its imagery, and it still is, and maybe that's the point we're at, where a family of a mom and dad with traditional gender roles is based and red pilled and something to look up to. But
well, I think here would be a good point to say what Tove's parents were actually. So
we actually, can we get into that later, because I have a whole sort of like section on her and her family.
Okay.
And we're going to cover it a bit in the characters as well. Before we start into the characters of the show, I want to show, just because you found this and I wasn't aware of it, this drawing she did of, this is Bilbo and Gollum from Lord of the Rings for the Finnish translation. Was that it? Of The Hobbit?
Swedish
translation. Before it was specified that Gollum was a small creature. And it really shows her sort of way of drawing something that can be, the little cute guy down in the corner, but he can still be tough up against this absolute hell monster in the water here. But it's a very, we've been covering the folk tales stream, and in that we looked at a lot of the Theodor Kittelsen art, and it reminds me very much of a lot of that. It's this expression that seems like it only comes out of the deep dark woods of the Nordics.
Yeah, it's able to be very scary without being sort of over-designed. Like I see a lot of modern cartoons where they just, they just have so many skulls and cuts and teeth everywhere. And I mean, this has very little in terms of like these very sharp edges or these, sort of more disgusting details, but it's still very kind of unsettling in many ways.
Yes, and darkening out sort of the face leaves a lot up to the imagination of what it actually looks like, I think. I very much enjoyed this picture. Okay,
yes, and actually, just to mention on that picture, I believe this was drawn before the introduction of the character in Moomin that we will get to, the
Grok.
Grok, yes. So you can probably see where we're going to get to. So this may be a first version of Grok.
So we're going to start with a bit of a character rundown of the Moomins. And we're going to spend a varying amount of time depending on how interesting the character is. But just so we have an idea, and so that our listeners have an idea that when we talk about these characters, they know what they're about. So we start with the titular character, the Moomin troll, who often is the audience surrogate, I suppose, in the sense that he's a curious boy who likes to investigate and discover things. He likes the sea. I think that's a trait that a lot of the Moomins share, and something that Tove did herself. She was very enamored by the sea and the ocean throughout her life. So this is a very basic character in that sense. He's friendly. He is interested in new things. And he can be at times a bit irritable, I suppose, and rash. But overall, a bit of a blank slate at times.
Very much a blank slate. He gets to be like this kind of default character model for the rest of them, because they don't have many distinct physical characteristics, especially in the Moomin family. So they have to use things like a hat or a dress or something to kind of distinguish them, because they look so similar. But yeah, the Moomin troll just has no piece of clothing or nothing. It's just, like you said, the audience kind of stand-in.
I'm going to jump right along pretty much to Snufkin. I wasn't able to translate the image that I had, because I managed to get all of the images in the same style except for Snufkin for some reason. So this is from the animation from the 90s. And Snufkin is a very interesting character, and probably why a lot of people sort of gravitate towards the show. Because he is a character that is very much he's a drifter by nature. He leaves in the fall around November before the Moomins hibernate, and he comes back during the spring and sets up his tent in the Moomin Valley, where he stays for as long as he feels like, pretty much. And at times in the stories or in the shows, he'll appear and disappear, or go off to do something that he feels is right when he feels it's right, or he will at times blatantly disregard law enforcement when he feels like the rules are unfitting or unfair. So he's these cool, mysterious wanderer type, and that, I suppose, that appeals to a lot of people. I heard in one of the documentaries I rewatched for this, one of the interviews, or the people they interview, British guys, is that every guy, when they watch Moomin when they're young, wants to be Snufkin, and one day they wake up and find their Moominpappa, which I found to be a humorous way of saying it.
Yeah, I wonder if is this the only humanoid character they have in like the main cast?
In the main cast, sort of, yes.
Depends on what you count as the main cast. In the
fair enough.
show, they get more humanoid characters into the main cast, but those characters aren't main cast in the books and the comics that are the original sources. But I think we can sum up Snufkin as the Sigma male.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, for this picture, I think it's from the 90s TV show, and I think this is the most anime-looking character of all of them. I mean, you probably identify with him, I guess. Also, I mean, he looks really cool. The hat is cool. The features are sharp. Like he does what he wants, and he's sort of I also remember having a very fond memory of Snufkin.
plays the
There's also
harmonica, hangs out, you know.
He's just always he's super cool Generation X Moomin. So, but it's also that thing about not getting, you know, the trick about sort of not seeing too much of someone. Like he just goes away and comes back whenever, you know. So you don't get tired of him.
That's true, and his character is also someone who will. He has this sort of like air of is it affable? Is that the word? People will tell him stuff and he'll go, "Whoa, that's nice," and then sort of just go off and do his own thing. It's just sort of like politely decline communication with them. So yeah, he's very much a drifter character, and I think that's and a mysterious and almost cool guy in that sense, and I think that's why a lot of people like him.
But despite all these selfish characteristics, he does. His introduction is in one of the first books. The what is it called in English? The book Comments in Moominland,
mm-hmm.
And he basically teaches Moomin troll survival skills.
Yeah, I think Tove Janssons Moomin is partially based on one of her boyfriends, I think when she was in art school or something like that, a philosopher that I don't recall the name to right now, who had a lot of the same characteristics, at least psychologically, a bit of a drifter in terms of his intellect, and someone who always challenged Tove to try new things. And she ended up leaving him for some reason, or I don't recall the details. I'm not sure if she left him or he left her, but they had to split up, and it seems like in her note, from what I recall, that it was something that she regretted for quite a while, but they would never sort of find their way back together.
How to get laid in art school 101.
Yeah, just talk about Socrates, Lamau. You get all the women
totally unaffected.
Sigma male activity. All right. He also has a wizard hat, says Raspberry. Yes, that might help add to the drifter archetype. Moominpappa, who I find to be a very interesting character in that he has a lot of the characteristics of Tove Jansson's father, which we'll probably talk a bit about later. But Moominpappa is someone who loves adventure, and he will constantly be reminiscing about his adventures that he had in his younger days. There are two books in the series. One is called The Adventures of Moominpappa, I think, where he actually talks about his adventures, and that's what the book is about. And one of the later books is the events are triggered by Moominpappa wanting to sort of like uproot the family and deciding that we've been in the Moomin Valley long enough, we need a new adventure. And he takes them out to an abandoned island where there's only a lighthouse in the middle of the sea.
Doesn't he bring in a zeppelin at one point?
Probably. I don't quite recall. He's very much a conservative, traditional man. This is a guy who spent his youth adventuring, and now he's put down roots with his family, and he has his study at the top of their house, where he writes memoirs about his adventuring days and smokes his pipe. And wishes to be undisturbed.
And he lifts as well.
Yes, he lifts as well.
Yes, and adding to the archetype, I think there might as well been a picture of him right here, of him standing in front of the whole family, in front of the house with his shotgun in hand.
Yeah, his musket or shotgun. Yeah. Yeah, there's some very nice imagery in that sense, and And I think in the very first episode of that animation show, there's a moment where the mother, Moominpappa, we'll get to in a moment, they've let loose some sort of wizardry stuff in their house. There's plants or like roots growing all over the house. And she knocks on his door where he's writing the memoirs, and he says, he tells her to come in, and she's like stuttering, trying to explain what's happening, and he's like, "Oh, is it that bad?" And then he runs down to get his axe and try to defeat the roots along with Moominpappa. So he's a guy who's like very much ready for adventure and ready to protect his family.
A true aristocrat and a political
He's
lion.
a true aristocrat, yes.
Yes, he has built his house, a big tower, a keep in the middle of the valley, on the big hill in the valley. It might as well, just be have walls around it as well, and be shooting arrows down from it.
Yeah. Welcome on board, Vingel. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hello.
I had to find the right folder there on my computer.
Right.
So thank you for allowing me in spite of being late.
That's fine. You couldn't stay away from the Moomins.
No, I figured you were having such a cozy time, and I was listening in while also packing and stuff for moving. So I figured it's probably best just to relax with you guys for a while I'm also kind of stressed out. But it's interesting that I arrived just after you mentioned the Lighthouse story, because that's the book I mentioned that unfortunately went in a box, and I was unable to find it again. But I read a few of the chapters, and it's a wonderful story, I think.
Yeah, we'll get to that book specifically in a later slide here.
Okay.
So we'll just move along and get through the characters, I think.
I will just add, if I may, that
yes.
Well, anyway, I can add that later if we're getting to the story. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sure. Next up, we have Moominpappa, who is obviously based on Tove Jansson's mother. Moominpappa is a very traditional motherly figure. Always has whatever is needed in her handbag here on the side. Always has a meal ready for the children, and always has plenty of love to go around. I'm not sure if we need to say anything else in that sense. She's not a. I mean, she's a complex character, I suppose, but her base motivations are pretty clear. She's an archetypical mother figure.
Yes, and as such, the stories don't really revolve around her as much, which is, I guess, points for the whole.
Apart from the first one, I would say, but that is because it pretty much revolves around Moomin Troll and Moominpappa trying to find Moominpappa. But aside from that, yes, she's very much sort of in the supporting cast in the sense that she's a mother.
Yeah,
I think there is one of the later stories of the Moomins where the plot is that everybody's just trying to go off and do their own thing, in a sense, and trying to experiment, and that works until Moominpappa decides to do the same thing, and after that happens, everything just falls apart. So there's a clear understanding that she is the kind of backbone of the family, and even if she has a supporting role, that nothing else can really work if she's not actually there being a mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good catch.
Yeah, she's certainly the one keeping. She's the glue of the family for sure. She is the quintessential mother. So that's an interesting point by Ludwig about that story.
So I mean, there are other shows. They've talked about doing a show on Unpopular Opinions or some other academic agent show on King of the Hill, and if they're not doing it there, maybe we should do it. Does anyone of you watch King of the Hill?
I have never
Mike
actually.
Judge show. No, I mean it is a very kind of American show, but it's, you know, like this show, it's about a show about a family, maybe not as traditional, but it's a sort of family living in Texas, and they have a lot of plot lines that's sort of about the mother having like various breakdowns or these sort of like FOMO episodes and such. I'm just kind of happy that Tove Jansson didn't include anything like this in the
yes,
in the Moomin universe.
Moominpappa has established order in her life, so
that's true.
Is free to support everyone in return.
Yes. We'll just move along to the next character here. There's Sniff. One of the side characters, really. I'm not sure if we want to spend a lot of time on this guy.
He was actually my favorite character when I was very little, because he's sort of a comic relief guy.
That's
certainly
true.
In the animated series, but I've come to actually dislike Sniff quite a bit as I grew older, because he's maybe he reminds me too much of myself. I don't know, because I'm feeling that I have way too much stuff right now as I'm moving, and Sniff is very possessive, and
he's a bit of a hoarder. Yes.
Yeah, he's very much of a hoarder, and Birkarl mentioned Comet in Moomin Valley. That's in the animated series. That's the first episode. It's a feature-length film, and it's very, very good. That's also where we first meet, or where the Moomin family first meets Snufkin.
Yeah.
And there's a scene there with rubies, jewels and stuff. He just goes crazy over expensive stuff.
Yes, Sniff is the best friend of the Moomin Troll, sort of a comic relief character, and very much cowardly as well.
Yeah.
Hiding behind him all the time when there's even the semblance of danger. But this picture here, of course, demonstrates the helpful side as well. So
yeah, he's giving the cat some milk, I think, or maybe water. Okay. Next up, we have Little Mai. Now, this little rascal here, as you might be able to see from her characterization, is a bit of a hellraiser, I suppose. Little Mai will pretty much just tell him, or just say whatever she feels like, whenever she feels like, and do whatever she feels like, whenever she feels like. So she's a bit of a fiery and sort of irritable little bastard, really, but sort of in a, it's done in a wholesome way. So it's almost like a positive outlet for sort of rage is the wrong word, but irritation or being able to sort of just say straight up to people what you want or what you want to do.
Yeah, you can create a lot of fun situations with characters like this who can say whatever they like and not have too many consequences for it. It does help that she is actually, as the title says, very little and very small. And you can sort of say things when you're sort of a very small woman that you just could not do this if you were a larger size without being put into a prison or something like this. But yeah, she is sort of as mean and menacing as you can be for this size. I mean, the design itself, it says almost everything you have to know. It's very communicative in terms of her character.
As an example, in that same episode I was talking about earlier, which I think is the very first episode of the animation from the 90s, when these roots envelop the tree, it is Little Mai who starts off this process by tossing something into the wizard's hat. And when she finds out that these roots are growing, she pretty much decides that, well, the roots are going to own the tree now, and that's what's going to happen. And she doesn't think twice about the fact that she's potentially destroying the home of the Moomins.
Yes, she's always the first to react, be that reaction what it may, laughter, aggression, or anything else. Usually not cowardly. Like
no.
She berates Sniff for his cowardice very often.
Yeah.
I believe that. Okay, you pulled up Lucky Pants. You can read that.
Oh, okay, sorry. So many women 2010 to 2017 basically based their personality on Little My.
And can't pull it off.
I don't know about that phenomenon, but I can see that it would be correct.
I can imagine a couple of girls I've known, at least, who fit that archetype. But I was going to say that Little Mai is adopted by the Moomin family, so I can't quite recall if she is her sister is the apprentice of the witch. Is she not?
We're getting into sort of extended universe stuff here, where the anime goes off the rails after a couple of episodes.
Sure.
But she has an older sister. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Does she have? I can't find anything here. Yeah. No. Sorry.
Yeah, this character is sort of the Freudian id archetype. I forgot to mention that last time. Yeah, as far as like women imitating this behavior, I mean, is this the kind of thing that they are actually watching the show and they're trying to be funny, or is it just more of a general commentary from Lucky Pants about the state of modern women? I'm not
sure. I just found it funny. I think in terms of like, if you want to say which character from this show ruined an entire generation, I would put my money on Snufkin.
Why is that, Walrus?
Pretty much because of my encounter with LGBT Snufkin stands researching this video. There's an entire subculture that's very into Snufkin that is also very gay in, as I said, every sense of the word.
I'm so lucky I didn't run into that, and my image of Snufkin.
Yeah, no, I haven't either. So it's, you know,
my image of Snufkin is still the Unabomber Snufkin.
Yeah, and I'll keep it that way. It's the Unabomber Snufkin. Yeah,
I think he's too well groomed to be the Unabomber, but we can do a new season of like the Mummies, where he comes back as a sort of like with the beard and he's like started losing his hair. And it's just eyes.
He's written a book and
bags under the eyes. So do you want to read my manifesto, Moomin? Just let us see this blow up.
Yeah, I heard you mention that earlier as well, Walrus, but I never came across any of that content either, and.
I hadn't either. I just stumbled upon it as I was researching here, and then I sort of decided to dig a bit deeper, and apparently there's a whole thing. Yeah,
because I just view him as a sort of nomadic character.
Yeah,
maybe I mean, it's a bit pathetic to stretch it into sort of like proto-Indo-European territory here, but. I think it's quite beautiful, the view he has of he's basically the antithesis of Sniff when it comes to possessiveness, because he barely owns anything. He just has a sort of a thing at the end of a stick, and he leaves Moomin Valley every autumn, comes back in the spring, and no one really knows just what he's seen, but he takes his he has the attitude of owning whatever he experiences rather than physical possessions.
He is the Buddha on the road.
Yes, he is.
So I think, like, in terms of the sort of Snufkin gay milieu there, he is the most sexualizable character among this entire cast. So I wouldn't be surprised, like, all of the energy just goes into him.
That might be just basically why, he's the only one that you can put it into.
Because most of them are so like child friendly in their design that there's no like aside from these. Okay, I'm not going to go. We're not going
cartoon characters. I've had enough of it. We're gonna move on. And now they're talking about LGBT Lord of the Rings in a chat. Can we got to move on from this?
Put the lid on.
Oh no! And now we're gonna move into the actual LGBT stuff. All right. So Tutiki is very much the analog character for Tuulikki. Am I pronouncing that correct, Burkal?
Tuulikki.
Okay. Who was Tove Jansson's partner, female partner from, I think I don't have the exact dates, but for most of her adult life.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere from her late 30s. Basically when Tove realized she hit the wall with men.
Yeah, basically. From 1956, so she's born in 1914, and from 1956 she met Tuulikki.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're pretty spot on with that analysis.
Yeah, this is basically well known in Finland.
Yeah, and Tuulikki
it's not been a part of any of the biographies, but anyone looking at the situation.
Yes. And Tuulikki is a character that is... Tuulikki is a girl, but she is a very tomboyish girl in that she enjoys working with her hands, doing repairs. I think she does sailing as well. Let me pull up some notes here. And also the most philosophical character. And that's also a bit of the reason why Tuulikki is introduced. And Tuulikki is introduced very late in Tove Jansson's work. It's for the latter, I think, 3 of her books. She appears mostly as a sort of like almost a narrator at times, and a mouthpiece for philosophizing within the Moomin universe.
Did you mention already that she lives in the small house at the end of the pier there, down by the sea?
That's true. She lives by the pier, yeah, up by the sea.
Mm.
Which completes sort of the whole Moomin, both the Moomins themselves and the general aesthetic is very, very influenced by Finnish and I suppose Nordic seafaring culture.
And of course, maybe you wanted to get to this later, but the Moomin trolls hibernate during the winter. But I think maybe Tuulikki is I don't know, is
Tuulikki is awake during the winter.
Yeah, that's what I
think this comes down to well, I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but the different races of
I don't have like a phenotype chart of the Moomins.
Yes, I know. I actually considered, going really hard on it, but I decided against it. There's these somewhat humanoid characters like Little My and Snufkin and some of the others, extended universe, as you said. But
sorry, Burkhardt, I was going to say Little Maya has been adequately sort of integrated into Moomin troll culture, hasn't she? That she also hibernates during the winter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So,
but I seem to recall from one of the books that she is often the first one to wake, which is probably because she's not necessarily naturally hibernating, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, there are a few quite wonderful stories where there is at least one where the Moomin troll awakes sort of too early, and he's awaiting the arrival of Snufkin.
That is the one where Tuulikki is introduced, actually. I think it's called Moomin Valley in the winter or something like that.
Yes, exactly. I have that on the VHS, and he goes down to the pier there and hangs out with Tutiki, I seem to recall.
I think
Yes,
that book has some of the more interesting artistic pieces in it, or illustrations in it, because of how haunting Tove draws the Moomin Valley and the various set pieces that you've seen otherwise during the day, but she draws them now during nighttime and draws them as something unfamiliar and a bit scary and dangerous.
There is also an episode in that story where there is almost a sort of witches' Sabbath, or sort of a pagan ritual, but actually conducted by the critters of the forest, I think, who sort of dance shadow-like around the big fire until the grok arrives and puts it out with their coldness. But we haven't gotten to her yet, I guess. But it's very evocative. Oh, there she is.
Here's the grok. Now, the grok is probably the character that most people who have seen the anime will remember, at least if they watched it when they were children, because it can appear quite scary. And the grok turns up usually uninvited to whatever situation she shows up in, and she has a sort of chilly, frosty aura around her where everything turns to ice over time. And it's been probably discussed over and over what the grok symbolizes in a lot of these stories, but I think Tove Jansson uses the grok as sort of like a stand-in for quote-unquote society at times, because the grok isn't necessarily an evil creature. It's usually some problem that needs to be solved, or it's something that the Moomins have misunderstood, and once they act the way, the way they should, then the grok usually turns back into the forest or something.
Yes, and that's why when they give him the rubies, her the rubies, she goes away. She's the taxman of society.
Yeah, that's a way of putting it as well.
That's the most crass way of putting it, of course. But.
Yeah.
As I would say she represents, I think Walrus was touching on this, sort of the outsider of in society, and she isn't actually evil or mean. I think she is actually seeking warmth, but she is, of course, basically coldness itself, and wherever she sits for too long, the grass withers, and she basically has the Midas touch in a way. Everything she touches turns to ice, and so no one will associate with her, and she's very lonely and quite a tragic figure.
Of course, you had the cringe take in one of these documentaries that the grok was a stand-in for homophobia in society, and like the sort of storyline with the red ruby and these two characters, Tom and the other these two small characters with the suitcase and the red ruby inside. That they were supposed to represent like Tove Jansson and one of her girlfriends who were running around with their secret love inside the suitcase, and then society is coming to take it away from them in the form of the homophobic grok.
Yes, I didn't actually see the documentary you mentioned, but I was thinking of another angle as well, that the grok is the gay person that never that seeks acceptance, but
never gets it.
That's not my take necessarily, but you could make that claim.
It's one of those things where it was never explicitly stated by Tove, so we'll never know what the character necessarily is, because it doesn't explain itself. So it leaves room for a lot of interpretation.
As it should. I think that makes the character great.
Yep.
And everything about it too, like with the freezing and the general presentation, is what makes it scary. The design itself is not really that something you look at and you're immediately scared, but they're able to present this character in a way that's just so kind of uncomfortable and menacing. It's very effective.
Maybe I can just mention how absolutely terrified I was actually as well when I was.
I think we all were.
I mentioned pre-stream how I distinctly remember my biggest recollections of Moomin are, well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, Moominpappa standing in front of the whole family with a shotgun, but what he's pointing it as is Groke. And meanwhile, me, 5 years old, watching the Moomins, I'm jumping behind the sofa, too scared to look.
Yeah.
Moominpappa is Chad, though. So, yeah. And you can, of course, see in this illustration that she is attracted to the light and the warmth. And, when she gets too close, she'll just put out the light. So that's her sort of eternal curse.
Yep. Lastly, I couldn't, after Burkarl decided to put on the stinky socks for the stream, I couldn't help. I have to had to include Stinky, even though he's a bit of a side character. And I'll first show these. How do I share my screen?
By the way, I thought you were about to say he's a bit of a psycho, which is instead of a side character, which is true as well, I think.
Yeah, he's another one of these outside. Yes, there's my feet pics.
Oh shit! I should have blurred them. I'm sorry.
This is the Patreon exclusive stuff, Walrus. You can't blow it immediately.
No. Yeah, but another one of these outsider characters, but at least he actually goes through some dialogues and with the Moomin. And he's constantly causing them mischief by stealing their raspberry juice, as you can see here. But in one of the stories, he's once actually paid off by the Moomin. He's just given a huge pile of was it gold or something, and he refuses to take it because that's somehow against his code. He wants to actually cause them grief and trouble. Well, not grief maybe, but he wants to, more than the material harm, he wants to be this disruptor.
He's a little bastard.
So he's the Joker basically in this universe.
He's fast moving, as Raspberry Treacle says. You can see that because he has like anime speed lines behind him. Nordanon says Longhouse OnlyFans. Well, there is a Subscribestar, subscribestar.com/a-walrus, where you can become a $5, $10, or $15 donator per month, and all the proceeds will go to make this show better.
With more stinky socks.
With more stinky socks. No.
That's our first goal, is stinky socks for every member.
There's some content coming up on that Subscribestar, either in the form of subscribers only Q&A stuff. Luddick might want to show off some old video games, things like that.
I don't know what people like. I mean, the one Subscribestar we have, what exactly they would like to do, because at this point it's quite flexible. If they want like parasocial stuff, I guess we could do some parasocial stuff, or just some sort of gaming streams. I don't know. It's a completely open door at this point.
Yeah, but things are happening, and if you like the show and if you like to support it, consider tossing us $5 a month. It means so much. Isn't that the line? Okay. So, I think we've covered all the characters now, yep. Well, not all the characters, there's a lot of characters, but we've covered the essential characters. And I want to talk a bit about Tove Jansson herself. And she was born in, what did we say, 1914, to artist parents. As a, did you call it a Finno-Swede, Burkarl?
Yes, Finno-Swede, just like
Finno-Swede. Okay.
Phenotype, yeah. Right.
Yes. And she and both her brethren, she had two brothers, became artists. So there was really something in the in the water in that household, I suppose, or I suppose it runs in the family, in the genes to become an artist. Excuse me for a second.
So I guess the early life term is a little bit loaded in these circles.
Oh yes, early life does not mean anything other than we're just talking about her early life. But this is why she very early got sort of like artistry into her veins, basically, with her watching her mother's work, with her watching her father's work. Her father was a sculptor, and quite a conservative man, according to all sources I could find, but also very adventurous. He had partaken in World War I and seemed to show some signs of that as he was aging. But during her early life, he would usually either bring her into the studio where he would do sculptures of people, men, women, children, that were placed around Helsinki in fountains, etc. And sometimes she'd also be used as a model for these. So she had a very strong artistic impression very early on. And I think she, at a very young age, illustrated a picture book that like didn't get published, obviously, but she made it like fully, and like she was like 15 years old or something like that. So she really had a strong upbringing in artist life, and she wanted to become an artist, and I think specifically she wanted to be a classical artist, really, and not a cartoonist or illustrator that she ended up being. And that is something that I think she wrestled with, I suppose, for quite a long period of her life.
Well, I think we'll get to this, but she literally did. She signed a 7-year contract to do the comics, but she dropped out of it after a few years and just left it to her brother.
Yeah, so for most of its time, her brother was the one who actually drew the Moomin comics, which is what made her very famous, really. So I think, let me check my notes here for a second, make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. No, I want to talk a bit about her family for a bit more, because I mentioned her father, and her father was a very conservative and very adventurous man, and very much the source for Moominpappa. I recall reading about how he, whenever there was like a fire somewhere in Helsinki, to the point where they could see smoke, he would like pick up the children or take the children with him, and they'd go fire hunting, as he called it, where they would just watch the fire. So he was very much like looking for adventure at all times, but he was also a very artistic personality. He would have mood swings and creative sort of periods, and then periods of less creativity, which understandably leads to a lot of instability in the household. So that's also why her mother ended up doing a lot of illustrative work on the side as a way to earn them some money.
It's the artistic bipolar disorder.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's hard to know how much of this was after effects from the war. It seems that as he became older, the PTSD really started to set in, and I think he started drinking more and more as well. I suppose you would call it shell shock back then.
Yes, I mean, it's as an aside, it's quite fascinating because I've seen this with some other people as well. You'd think that they get out of that situation and they live a sort of normal life and they are able to move on or kind of grow out of the PSTD. But as you said, with some people, it just seems to be getting worse the older they get, even if they live reasonably kind of sane middle class lifestyles.
Yep.
Well, I would point out that it wasn't that much middle class as nearing upper class, to be honest.
That was something I was going to add. This family was pretty upper classy, and you see that once Tove leaves the household to study, she's able to get into a good school, and she's able to basically live a very socialite life. Very sort of this bohemian artist life where all you do is party and talk about life and, you know,
so
have
like
sex.
Yeah, but being upper class, just a question, like in this context, does that mean that they came from old money or something, or are they more of like a cultural elite?
There were Fenno Swedes in Helsinki, so that means they were of the previous ruling class up until basically the Russians took over in the early 1800s. So
and I think Victor, who is her father, his father, so Tove Jansson's grandfather, he owned one or more stores, which in the late 1800s means that you're pretty well off if you own like general stores.
Yes, I think the Fenno Swedes in the more countryside are basically, you know, farmers and more like everyone else. But if you're a Fenno Swede in the capital, that basically means you're a part of the New York class if you were to be an American.
Yes.
Swedish
on the other side,
merchants.
On the other side, you have her mother, who Moominpappa is based on, who Tove has always, and her brothers has always described as very loving and always and protective and everything that a mother should be. But also very inclusive in including them in the art as well that she produced. But ultimately, when I think her parents ended up separating after a point when her father deteriorated, Tove at least sided very much with her mother, it seems. But I think in a lot of her art, a lot of her art has a tendency to express more of her father's demeanor and her father's conservative values than I think she realizes. That's just my opinion.
Yes, I agree. All the contemporary and the analysis over time has constantly hammered home the message of what Tove was trying to do with the Moomin. You know, supposedly this very bohemian living family. But I just ask anyone, look at the Moomin stories, look at the animations, look at anything Moomin, and ask if this is more bohemian or more this upper class family that you see in this picture here. And I think the answer is pretty clear.
Indeed. And it's also something that I found researching this, that there seems to be, I've had trouble finding any sources for this, but this might be in like some tucked away page of her personal notes. But there seems to be some sort of narrative that her father didn't like her work as an illustrator, but I cannot find anything that corroborates that. And I think that in her art, there would be more of an expression of that if she was sort of defying her father in that sense. But she did define him very much in in the way she disagreed with him politically, and probably the work she did for some of the political cartoonist magazines, which we'll get to in a moment.
Perhaps it is noteworthy that the Moomin Valley is, after all, named for the Moomin family. Seems quite obvious, and because, of course, Moominpappa didn't live there before he settled down.
That's true.
We can get into his youthful adventures later, but and then he also wishes to settle on that far island with the Longhouse, sort of break new ground, even though they seem to live quite happily in there.
Yeah,
but sort of an aristocratic and well, we can get to the Faustian bit later, so if you want to inject that into it, maybe it's a bit too much. But
I think you can find a lot of that in the one with the lighthouse. Yes, but we'll get to it.
Yeah, exactly. I'd just like to reinforce the point earlier about, there's this Moomin Valley. There's a big hill in the middle of the Moomin Valley where there's this keep-like this tower in the middle of that hill, on the top of that hill, in the middle of the valley. It's practically, Moominpappa is basically a feudal lord almost.
Yeah, very much so. And then I'd like to mention the last two here. It's her brothers sitting in the forefront. And this art piece that Tove made, I think, is very telling of how she viewed the family. After she had grown up. This is painted is it the early 1940s? This is during the war, because her brother, the older one on the right here, had been drafted into the war, and there was a bit of an internal schism in the family over whether or not he should go to war, with the father supporting him and the mother wanting him to stay, which I suppose is very natural in both ways. And you can see the composition, obviously, in this artwork, is that the brother is sitting on the side of his father, while the younger brother is looking sad by his mother. Meanwhile, Tove herself is standing in the middle, looking towards her mother, but she's also, it seems like she's mourning, looking at her clothes. So she might be feeling that her family is falling apart, and she's not going to be able to get it back. And in a sense, that's also what happened over time. And as Nordanon says, you can tell that Moominpappa is upper class because he has a top hat. So yeah, there it is. Any comments on this artwork?
Yeah, the mother having a nice smoke, I think.
Well, they all smoked, I think. Tove ended up dying of cancer, if I recall correctly, so because of her smoking. But to add to the point of the upperclassness, we can go into the artistic career here. She studied at the University College of Arts, Craft and Design in Stockholm from 1930 to 33, and she went to the graphics school of the Finnish Academy of Fine Arts. And then she went to a French art school in Paris until 1938. And this is in the 30s, so you got to remember that art school isn't necessarily free. So there was money floating around to support this lifestyle. And she also made several trips to different European countries.
Yes, I think her mother and partly her father also expected her to go into the Swedish Royal Academy instead of the more Finnish modernist school.
Yeah,
that she ended up going to.
And this might also be the source for her sort of feeling that she had to succeed in the classical artistry, probably because her father pushed towards that quite a bit. After she studied, or during her studies as well, she drew illustrations for a satirical magazine called Garm, which it's labeled anti-fascist, but I found just as much anti-Soviet and anti-communist examples from Garm. So I'm not sure if you have any more details on that, Burkarl.
I don't know about Garb, but she definitely did work for several newspapers, magazines, whatever.
Yeah.
And actually, the first Moomin cartoon was published in a magazine called New Tid, New Time, which was a Swedish language newspaper for the SKDL, meaning the communists.
Uh-huh. Well, there we have some of her proclivities then. But I do recall her also drawing anti-Soviet imagery for various magazines as well during the wars. Or during the war, sorry. And very much once the war started and arrived in Finland, she turned very anti-war in general. There's a very shift from pro-communist to sort of just anti-war in general.
Yes, I think I jumped the gun with that one, since the first Moomin cartoon is post-war, because there was no SKDL, there was no communists in pre-war Finland.
Yeah,
they were all getting well. I won't say
asked
what they were
to
getting.
leave.
Yeah, in more harsh terms, but yes.
I'm kind of pleased with myself right now, if I may say so, because I was thinking Garm is the hound that guards hell in Norse mythology, and apparently that is the thing that the title of the magazine refers to. It's equivalent to Cerberus in Greek mythology, and apparently the Garm is a successor of Kerberos, so that's
Okay.
Perhaps it isn't so. I was just thinking it sounds more traditionalist than with those references, but I know nothing of the magazine really.
Right. Now, of course, she had a period of working as the illustrator of the Moomin cartoons. Now I'm jumping ahead a bit, but this is post-war stuff. She writes and illustrates the first couple of Moomin books, and then she gets a deal with a British newspaper. I don't remember quite which one. If one of you can Google it real quick while I talk here. Which she started in the mid-50s. And as you said, Burkarl, she works for this, or she works with this illustration for about 5 plus, give or take, years before she gives up and lets her brother Lars continue as the illustrator and writer of that cartoon. And then it continues on to like mid-70s, I think.
She apparently wrote for the evening. Sorry, I just had it here. The Evening Standard in the 1950s.
Okay, so that's the London newspaper, Evening Standard. Okay. Evening News, I'm getting reports of here. Okay, so yes, maybe it's Evening News.
That's why I stuttered there. I guess it changed its name later, perhaps.
Oh, okay, maybe. Yep. And also throughout this time, she worked as a general painter, artist, and illustrator, and we can and she had a brief stint in theater as well. We can have a look here at one of her paintings when we cover her sexuality for a brief moment, because in the I want to say I want to say in the 1940s, in the late 40s or early 50s, that's when she first met one Vivica Bandler, an actress in which she had a brief affair with. And then in the mid-50s, she then meets Tuliki, who becomes her partner for the rest of her life. But this specific painting that we're looking at here, she drew after Vivica basically dumped her because she left for New York or something like that. Tove's self-insert is placed down here in the middle, slightly to the left. And if you zoom in, I don't know if I can zoom in, but there's a little Moomin by her glass where she's sitting there smoking. This painting is pretty much illustrating what she said was the sort of types of parties she would have during her sort of artist life when she was young. It's this very socialite stuff where people meet and cry and laugh and and drink and discuss philosophy all at the same time, very until the wee hours of the night, to the chagrin of everyone else in the building, of course. And I think that's what this is trying to illustrate, but it's also illustrating for Tove that she might be feeling that this is she's getting tired of this because of the result of her affair. But maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No, I think this. Well, I don't know about the affair thing. Of course, it has an effect, but I think this can illustrate her getting slightly fed up with this socialite lifestyle that we can see she will reject very strongly much later.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say that Jansson didn't have several male lovers during her university days, but the only one who's worth mention is the one I already mentioned, who was slightly the inspiration for Snufkin, the philosopher. And that's, I think, a brief overview of her life in that sense. But what's important next, I think we'll talk about it when we get to the relevant book, is or do you want to talk about it now, Burkarl, the island living, etc.?
Well, that comes much later in her life, so I think we should maybe, if we're going to go through the Moomin publications, I think
I wanted to go through the Moomin books, yes.
Yes, so I think we should leave it for we go through the later books.
Yep. So the first Moomin books is The Moomins and the Great Flood. And this is very much a post-World War I type of book, or mid-World War I type of book, where there's been a great flood, a lot of people have died, there's a lot of displacement, and the Moomin troll and Moominmamma is trying to find Moominpappa in the aftermath. And there is refugee waves actually depicted in the book as part of it. So, as you can see on the cover here, the Moomins that she's drawing is a bit... it's the prototype Moomins. They haven't quite become the lovable round creatures yet.
The anteater look didn't catch on, apparently.
Yes. But her style is still very strong. This sort of magical, mystical, uncanny style is very much present.
Yes, and we can see the ancestors of Sniff in the background.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can see. Yeah, you can see that there. The next one is Comet in Moominland. As mentioned, this is the first time you meet Snufkin and Sniff. There's also what's she called? The female Snork Maiden is the English one. I didn't include her in the character list mostly because she's like a mirror of Moomin Troll at times. But a slash love interest, I suppose. But she's not that interesting. So I didn't spend any time on her, but if you want to talk about Snork Maiden, now's the time.
She's quite annoying, really.
She is.
Don't worry. I have strong faith that Moomin Mama will guide her to be a good partner for Moomin Troll.
Probably, yes.
She is certainly very feminine, though. So.
Oh yes, perhaps, very much so.
Perhaps that's part of the reason, but I find her quite tedious.
A typical woman, in other words. So The Common in Moominland is the second book, and it deals with, well, a comet that is showing up in the sky, basically, and it's approaching slowly, and for a lot of the story, the Moomin Troll is the only one who feels like he realizes the danger of this, and he tries to convince other people that this isn't the sun, this is the comet, etc., etc. And I just wanted to spell real quick, because sometimes when you Google this, people will say that this is an allegory for like global warming. But this was written in the middle or right after World War II. Let me see if I can find the release date of this. This is obviously more about war or nukes or the Cold War, things like that. 1946. So this is much more about these kind of things than trying to insert some sort of global warming allegory into this. I'm pretty sure, at least.
Yeah, there was a big revision in 1968 to remove a lot of the she removed a lot of the specific places, because some Moomin stories refer to actual places. There's Moomins visit the Riviera and all kinds of these stuff, but in this revised version, she removes references to going to Mexico and removes references to religious figures like Moses. And she edits a lot of the descriptions of the places they're going through to resemble Finland more. And a lot of the more scary scenes, like getting attacked by crocodiles, are removed. This is mostly all just to comply with Soviet censorship.
Yeah. But you might still be able to find some old versions of The Common in Moominland if you know where to look. The next one is probably the biggest one, or at least the one that sort of was her breakthrough. It's called Finn Family Moomin Troll, or at times it's called the Moomin Trolls and the Wizard's Hat. And it includes said wizard, or hobgoblin as he's referred to, who is a magician riding on a panther who loses his hat, and the Moomins find it, hijinks ensue, and then there's these two red characters down here on the right, with the large ruby that the hobgoblin and the Groke is looking for, which creates some sort of tension here, of course, between the various factions. And in the middle of this is the Moomins, of course, but this is the first sort of introduction to Moomin Valley, to the fact that they're hibernating, this whole sort of cycle. It's very archetypal Moomin stuff.
Yeah, you've got these squiggly characters as well standing next to Moominpappa. I don't remember what they were called exactly, but I think they were
the
Hottie, the scary characters as well. They were like electric eels or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Hattifnatter in Norwegian. What's the Finnish name, Bergard?
Hattivatti.
Okay.
Literally like Nico hatti as in hot, and vatti as in watt.
Okay.
Electric. So
basically a bunch of electric eel characters that wander around the world, it seems.
Yeah, and when they create more electric charge, the more of them are in one place, and sort of storm causers and all kinds of stuff like this. I remember there's one story where they, I think this is one of the stories where the Japanese took more liberties or something, where there's a big problem with the Hantavattis.
That's true. I remember something like that too, vaguely.
Yeah, I didn't want to go watching, 200 episodes of Moomin before this. So
you can if you want to. It's on YouTube, but I think you can only find it with like Japanese audio and English subtitles.
I would have gone for the VHS tapes in my parents' basement.
Well, if you have the VHS tapes, then you should go for the VHS tapes. Yeah.
I believe there are some Norwegian language episodes on YouTube. I'm not sure, but
okay.
I have a decent collection of VHS tapes myself. Might mention the wizard. He's a very strange character. He rides a black panther across the skies.
It's very metal.
Yeah, at least in the animated series, and he lives on the moon, I believe.
I think he comes from the moon, or he spends time on the moon, and he lives at like the end of the earth. That's as it's called.
Yeah, because I remember reading. This must have been in sort of an illustrated by Jansson book, where we actually find him on the moon itself, and he notices that you can see him there in the landscape. The lunar landscape, and he realizes that his favorite red ruby stone is missing, so that's why he comes riding down on the panther to find this gem. And that's when he loses his hat as well, and they use the hat as a waste basket, and Moomin hides inside of the hat and gets turned into this unsightly creature.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is actually more anime than Snufkin, now that I think of it.
He is, actually. They made him very, very Japanese in the animation, but he's not that far off from the way he's drawn by Tove Jansson either.
So just adding, if you want to see the old Moomin troll, you can just post your address and credit card in the chats, and Beer Carl will send you the VHS tapes.
Only a finish.
Yep. And the 3 numbers on the back.
Of course.
Next up is the Memoirs of Moominpappa, which is a bit of a side adventure where Moominpappa writes. Basically, it's his memoirs that he writes for Moomin Troll and the others about his adventures from when he was young. And here he meets, I think it's Snufkin's father, and is it Sniff's father or something like that, and a bunch of other characters that build out the lore. Which is it's a very funny book, actually, mostly because it becomes clear quite quickly that Moominpappa is maybe embellishing the stories a little bit, which makes them even funnier if you're reading this to children or something like that.
I think this is a very cool Moominpappa lore. I mean, I haven't read the book, but I have a DVD with the Finno-Swedish language pronunciation, like Moominpappa. And I really adore these youthful stories of stories of his youth. So worth seeing. Yeah. And I believe there is a great flood in that one as well. And he hooks up with these guys and spends his time on a boat while they wait for the flood to sort of sink.
Yeah, I remember the boat. I don't remember the details of the flood.
I may be wrong, but I think so.
No, that's probably true. Next one is the Moomin Summer Madness. This is one she wrote after she had taken part in in the theater place, which then obviously inspired her to do the same for the Moomins.
This sounds like a parody, actually.
Yeah, maybe, but it's another flood. It's like, I don't remember what causes it, but something forces the Moomin Valley to be flooded.
The
And
first
so they
flood was, I think, retconned. It never happened.
okay. So this is canonically, quote unquote, the first flood.
Yes.
But this is basically the Moomin Valley floods. They're forced to climb on board boats, and they find this floating theater stage, and so they decide to set up a theater place, basically. A flood, yes, it's a recurring theme, but apparently this is the first canonical flood now, Yuli, so you have to forget all the other floods.
Yes,
a lot
yes.
of
The Moses references that there was a flood in there too. The Soviets didn't like any of that.
Yeah.
yeah, there are a lot of natural disasters, obviously, with the comet that barely avoids hitting the planet and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, recurring theme for sure.
The next one that's relevant is the Moominland Midwinter, which was the one we discussed earlier, where Moomin Troll wakes up early and has to explore the Moomin Valley in the dead of night during winter, basically, and he gets another view of how the Moomin Valley looks during that time of year. It is also a lot more philosophical than a lot of the other books. Not that the Moomins aren't philosophical outside of this book, but because of the introduction of Tutiki, it takes on a much more contemplative tone than the other books. At least until we get to the very last couple of ones.
There is another cool episode or scene in, I believe it's the episode relating to this story, where coming back to the race question, there are these creatures called hemuler in Norwegian anyway, and there's a skiing hemul who arrives on a hilltop over Moomin Valley. And before skiing down, he blows his horn. And I remember, this is trivia for sure, but the first time I heard Autobahn by Kraftwerk, their 1975 record,
Yep.
I instantly recognized one of the melodies. And it's for Morgenspaziergang. And I'm sure that they used the same melody when he blows his horn. They probably took it from Kraftwerk.
Huh.
It was like, where have I heard this before? And yeah, it's from the Moomin Troll.
Yes, on the matter of the hemulis, or whatever they're called.
There's if I can find a picture of them.
The skiing one was actually, I remember in the Finnish version, he was called literally the mailman, postelione. And there's, of course, also the policeman hemuli. And then there's the standard hemuli, who is a horticulturalist. Yeah, and stamp collector. That's the standard one, yeah.
Poor guy. It's a very nervous kind of fellow.
Yeah, I think these hemulis are more sort of specialized people, as opposed to the Moomins, who are, well, like more all-rounded.
Yeah, they're apparently they're avid collectors. It says here, so a bit of the tism going around with the Hemulins. Or professors, as Raspberry Treacle says. Look at that snout. But moving swiftly along, we have the next book, Who Will Comfort Tuffle, which is one of the more popular books today, I think, which deals with a kid who's driven out of his home, and they have to help him regain his confidence when he encounters different characters from Moomin Valley. There's not much more to say than that, really.
I'm sure you're right. It's common because I have that one, incidentally.
Yeah. Tales from Moomin Valley. If you watch the animated series from the 90s, this one is included there. It deals with an invisible girl who arrives in Moomin Valley, and the Moomin family has to help her sort of reappear by making her understand that she's safe and she can be herself and express herself there. It's been likened to people have interpreted it as sort of handling abuse. Children who have been abused will sort of go invisible in the psychological sense, and this is sort of like an allegory for sort of bringing a child back from the brink.
And she becomes visible again, does she not, after getting attention and love?
Yep.
Yeah.
When she gets the love and attention of the Moomin family, and over time she regains more and more of her appearance.
I think here is where we come to the...
Yep. In 1965, she releases Moominpappa at Sea, where Moominpappa decides that the family needs to make a fresh start, and he finds this lonely, rocky island in the middle of the ocean with an abandoned lighthouse, and he moves the entire Moomin family there, in which they have to sort of almost like go back to basics. They're living a very harder life than they did before, but they also all remark that despite that, they're living a much more fulfilling life. And you wanted to expand upon this with Tove Janssons' own experiences here.
So this book was written or published in 1965, but Tove, with her partner Tuulikki Pietilä, in 1964 moved to a very remote rock south of Helsinki, southwest of Helsinki, out in the beginnings of the Åland archipelago, but it's much more east of there, near Helsinki. And with her Tuulikki, they had been dreaming of moving there for several years beforehand already, and they had a description of what they wanted it to be beforehand, and it would have 4 windows, one on each side. On the southeast, room for the storms to wash over. On the east, the moon may reflect upon the lagoon. And to the north, one may gaze upon the coming and going of ships to ease the homesickness of civilization. And this motif of getting away from everything onto this small rock in the middle of the sea. Well, it's a bit, admittedly, the Baltic Sea isn't that wild of a sea. It's not very deep, but for 2 40, almost 50-year-old women to be moving there, it was kind of how are they going to be okay over there? But they did end up living there, on these 2 women, until they were into their 70s. So, and Tove personally attested that the restrictions put on them by the elements gave them the purpose. And she described the atmosphere as serene but fierce. as the fizzy and arrogant waves wash by every morning. And they decided to eventually leave on a stormy day when they were almost 70, 75 years old. When their one boat, a rowing boat, which was tied by 4 ropes, was in the morning found to be splintered into more pieces than they could count. So then they decided to move away finally. And after that, lived for very long after that, still, all the way up to 2001, as was mentioned before.
Yeah, and this is something that clearly affected Tove and her outlook on life, as you see in Moominpappa at Sea. And again, this whole point here is that with the hardships of nature and the clear purpose and what that provides, both her and the Moomins felt a lot more at ease. And I think, again, that is a lot of the connection that her father provided as well, sort of coming back to haunt her as she grows older, as it usually is. The dad was right phenomenon, I guess. So
yes.
sorry.
I'll just write the name of the island in the chat if people want to watch or look it up themselves. Klovharo. You can go visit there today if you want. But it's not huge. It's more of a Moomin museum now.
Yeah.
It's very interesting hearing about the real life inspiration. This is the book I mentioned that I couldn't find again, so maybe for the best, because I would probably have taken even more notes. But I found the opening very beautiful and magical. But I did write down a few sentences. There's a lot of focus in the early days after their arrival. Anyway, that the Moominpappa has been making a model of the lighthouse that he knows is out there apparently, and sort of dreaming about making a new life there. And then they find it, and it's sort of in bad state, and the former lightkeeper has, that's the word, has left the island. There's only this grumpy guy on the other end, fisherman who doesn't speak very much. But Moominpappa and Moomin go out to fish, and I can quote here: "It was very satisfactory to put out the fishing nets, a manly and calm work, something one does for one's family." And of course, I said earlier, it may be a bit pathetic to sort of troll earlier pieces of media for sort of hints of vaguely reactionary themes. But it's obvious that in spite of her Tove Jansson's sexuality, the characters in her books are very much archetypal, and
I think since they're based on such real people who were of the older generation, they have a much more traditional connection too. That is hard to ignore. And you can't write that out of Moominpappa and Moominmamma without basically changing them into different characters.
Yeah, and obviously, as you spoke of earlier, which I didn't know, it's based upon her father. And I was going to say, obviously, Moominpappa hasn't lost his sense of curiosity about the world. There's another quote here where he says, or where she writes, "I wonder," the father added seriously, "I wonder why the sea rises and sinks. it must have some explanation. So he has this sort of natural, inbuilt natural scientist in him that wonders about, I guess you could say, the laws of physics or the laws of nature. And there's also this last quote here to finish that. I mean, he is obliged to do a lot of things, like making repairs on the lighthouse, and also context here is that as you saw, or as you mentioned, this is a very windswept, rocky island, and Moominpappa explains to Moominmamma that they can use seaweed to make a new garden, to make new soil. And he says, "I don't want to do repairs," the father thought, or he thinks. "I don't want to pick seaweed. I want to build great, strong things. I want to do so many things. But I don't know, it's so horribly difficult being a father." So he is having his daily difficulties, obviously, but he's sort of dreaming about great things, as it says there. So I guess that's sort of to draw that parallel of Faustian man sort of trying to establish a new order in a wild climate.
So if you've been through the driver from the movie Drive, if you've been through the Joker, if you've been through all of these guys and you've thought to yourself, he's literally me, now Moominpappa is the next one. You can think about how you want to build strong, great things, but family life is holding you back.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very relatable to. I don't have kids, but a good friend of mine who does.
I can assume that this one's for the dads. Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, he said that he used to identify with Snufkin, but now he identifies more with Moominpappa for sure.
Yeah, and I noted that at the beginning in one of the documentaries about the Moomins. One of the people they interview say that, when I was young, I identified I wanted to be Snufkin, and then one day I woke up and realized I was Moominpappa. And that's something that's so great about the characterization here, and I think the way that they were based on such real emotions and feelings, as well as archetypes, that they stand the test of time in that sense. Sorry, I cut you off there, Vingol.
No, I was basically done with my spiel.
Okay.
So, but yeah, worth pointing out.
Yeah, I'm gonna head over to the final one that we're gonna cover here, and this is Moomin Valley in November, and this is the last Moomin book, and it actually doesn't have any Moomins in it. It basically deals with a lot of the other characters of the Moomin Valley, and some new ones coming to Moomin Valley, and finding it empty of the Moomins, and so they move into the home of the Moomins, and they live there throughout the winter and basically learn from each other and get from each other basically what they were looking for from the Moomins. Depending on the character, of course, they sort of all leave with their treasure, in a metaphorical sense. And at the end, it's left up to readers' interpretation whether or not the Moomins actually return back to Moomin Valley.
The Moomins have gone to the Rapture.
Basically, they've left across the sea. To the west.
Is it the continuity here that they're still by the lighthouse at this point?
Yes, that's the idea. They leave in the Lighthouse book, and they so the other characters don't know that they left. And that's the last you hear of the Moomins, really. There is some side books and some some characters that reappear in a later book, I think, but the Moomins themselves are never seen again. Do we want to talk any about the animations? I have a slide on that.
As we've mentioned before, the 1990 to 1992, the Japanese are very hard workers, so they created a huge amount of stuff in only 3 years. But this series ran in all kinds of countries for a very long time. Previous to this, there had been over a dozen other TV shows already produced in Japan and in the Eastern Bloc and in West Germany as well. And and they were adaptations of either the stories in the books or the stories from the comics. And Tove actually wrote only about the first third of the comics, I think, after which she just gave basic guidelines to her brother Lars, who then took over that, and he was writing all the stories. And I think everyone basically stuck to those original materials to one degree or another, except the Japanese, who constantly wanted to write their own stories with them, and often did.
Yeah.
But
it goes a bit off the rails, the 90s animation at times.
Well, not as much. The original, the first Moomin animation.
The 70s one. Yeah, that's...
that was completely... they made everything up.
So that's a hard pass.
So this series at least starts the first 24 episodes, I think. Almost all of them are from the stories. I haven't even read all the books, but when we went through the books, I'm like, yep, seen that. That's basically all through this TV show. And it's only the later episodes when they start going through the material Lars made, and then they start making stuff up as well. But this TV show is most likely, when you search for Moomin, and when Moomin memes are posted on Urilauta Finnish 4chan, it's everything is from this show, and this show defined a generation of Finnish kids, including myself.
Not just Finnish kids; it had a huge impact on a lot of European children, I think.
Well, yes,
it was
but
exported.
Of course, it was exported, but I would doubt the extent to which it had an effect on other countries, of course.
Right.
So when the Japanese start making their own plot lines, is there a visible deviation from the content, or is it just kind of more fillerish, boring stuff?
No, I think that it is sort of fillerish, but and it gets less philosophical. For example, I think one of the plot lines where it's completely made up is this one with the time machine. I think
a time machine. I don't recall that, but maybe I didn't see that see that far into it or watch that far.
That was one I especially, because Tove had all these themes in her stories of the Moomins going to actual physical places, like the Moomins at the Riviera, or
right.
The original story in the first novel was them going to Mexico. So the Japanese took the time machine, they go back to ancient Egypt and stuff like this, and they actually adapt back the crocodile attacks that were censored.
Ah, yes.
And they do all kinds of stuff like this.
You also mentioned a witch at some point, and I think that's also something that wasn't in the books.
The witch and the witch's daughter Alice,
right,
who is a much more comely female figure.
Yeah.
the Alice becomes a good friend of the Moomin, but the witch, of course, hates the Moomin and everything about them. And she lives in the forest brewing her stuff, and I think Stinky is often hanging around there somewhere as well.
And is the witch not in any of the books, or?
I think she's in one as a not even a main part of the plot, I think.
Okay.
And it was one of these books that we glossed by. So the Japanese really run with with a witch as a character.
And I think that covers pretty much. There's still more Moomin stuff. Like there's a lot of you can buy mugs, you can buy socks. There's a Moomin world,
Yes,
but I think for the purpose of of our listeners and our viewers, if you're interested in Moomin, you should engage with the books or the animation themselves, and not all of the other stuff.
Well, if you're ever visiting Finland, Turku, Åbo, nearby the neighboring town of Naantali, that's where Moomin World is. It's advertised as the sunniest town in Finland, and it is I think there's another Moomin World knockoff in Japan, but I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, if you're going to Japan, you're going to find a lot of Moomin stuff as well.
On a family holiday in Finland, Moomin World, I would definitely recommend it. And there's also the Moomin Museum, where a lot of the original illustrations and drafts and stuff of Tove made are stored in Tampere.
Right.
And yes, the Moomin mugs are pretty much a status symbol these days for middle class people here. And so there's all kinds of stuff like that.
I'll add that, it's a lot of products related to Moomin and with the Moomin world and everything, but I mean, if you're raising kids these days, the alternative is the mouse, and we know where he stands on these topics. So it's nice to see that there's some unpaused, at least in terms of its imagery, children's material that survived the 1900s, or I suppose you would say the early 2000s.
Don't give them ideas, Walrus. Don't jinx it. We hope that we'll never talk about the sexuality in Moomin again. We hope it remains separated.
Yeah, I hope I'll never have to experience that stuff again. So we're about 2 hours in. I've talked about everything I wanted to talk about with Moomin. Does anyone want to talk shit, or talk about current events, or should we just end the stream early?
I think we could end if there's no questions from the chat or anything.
Sure. If you have any questions for us, or any questions for us about Moomin, or things you want our based and right-wing takes on, just post them in the chat, and we'll stick around for a couple more minutes. We did talk a bit about, before we started the stream, we had a bit of a back and forth about there's been some rumblings in the community about academia and in the right-wing sphere, and I think we landed on an agreement in the sense that you need some sort of you called it interface, Ludwig. You need some sort of a collection of modules, of models to explain the world that functions as a basis to be able to have these conversations on, and saying that we can never have any sort of scholars in our circles would be too extreme.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the public interfaces that we need to talk, because the liberal framework does not give us the tools we need to discuss the problems that we have. It's really that simple. There's too much in-baked baggage in the standard kind of boomer truth already there. Like with boomer truth, you have a kind of tool, or one of these public interfaces that you can use to sort of discuss a type of mindset or problem that exists. That is sort of boomer, talking about boomer truth isn't boomer truth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, we're going to have academics. I don't know if this is really a big discussion. It just seemed to be some discontent from certain people.
It was just something I had noticed, and I thought about it, and I had a couple of notes, because coming from a programmer background, this is something that I have some experience with, just out of the practicality of having descriptors for models that you never want to implement onto reality, but you use them to talk about ideas and ideal sort of structures and architectures. But you would be crazy if you tried to say, if I were to read everything that, say, all right, let's just look at my shelf here. All right, let's say I read everything that Oswald Spengler ever wrote, and then I said, all right, I'm going to create a society based on that. I mean, already there with this sort of like a priori approach, we know that's not going to work, because we're not communists. You know, you have to use it as a guideline and as a way of talking about these models, and not as a model for how it's supposed to be. Only once you get there can you say, okay, this is Spenglerian, and then everyone you're talking to will understand what that means.
Yeah, but I think the communists, some of the reason for their success was also the fact that they were able to develop some public tools they could use to talk about things. And I mean, they have a developmental framework, even if you think it is utopian or completely delusional, in that they talk about dialectics, for instance, where they can sort of just adapt their kind of revolutionary framework onto almost anything else, because everything is just this constant dialectical development. And it's
and
much
then
more,
this bleeds
very
into
powerful.
And then this bleeds into the public consciousness. I mean, just look at, you know, we talked about the cathedral is almost a household name in mainstream political talk these days.
I've heard it from.
I think the main the underlying thing here is that brings to mind with this conversation is the Lamster conversation, Praise of Folly, Todd had with Lambda about what was the title? The strategy for the meta strategy for the right, or something like that.
I'm going to pull it up while you talk. Let's see.
So this was a conversation about exactly this. The left has this canon of established terms, literature. You know, they may not all agree with everything Marx said once upon a time, but they generally agree that something derivative of him, be it this branch or that, they disagree on the implementation, but not the end goal. And I think we are still at the point here where we are trying to establish these ideas, trying to get to the idea of an end goal, even if
basically,
I don't think we ever need to agree on the way to get there, because that will always...
but we have to agree on a set of models to navigate by, or a canon, if you want to call it that, to start from.
Yes, because the alternative is just to be stuck in this kind of Cold War paradigm, where you're just trying to be the opposite of the Soviet Union and protect liberal values, whatever that means right now. I mean, it's a bit of a dead model, so we really need something else. The way that I
suddenly
see,
you're defending feminism from Islam or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you end up like,
it's so confused.
You get caught in this like trap.
You just have like one thing that you care about, like counter jihad, for example, which we have discussed multiple times on the podcast, and you have to defend feminism, defend women's sports, defend gays from Islam, and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, the way I see this kind of like dissident far right sphere is like we're sort of trying to develop more of a language and kind of reintroduce realism, or kind of like realist foreign policy, Machiavellian ways of thinking about politics, instead of this kind of brain dead end of history liberalism that we've been kind of forced into defending for the last 30, 20 years.
Yeah, yes. That takes a while because it's a considerable effort to create basically a new canon to build life out of sustainably.
The title of the stream was Praise of Folly, Metastructural Analysis.
That's the one, yes.
Yes, and I think the subject veered, of course, into stuff too big brain for me, maybe. But I thought it was very interesting, and that came to mind immediately when you started on this programmer framework for action or analyzing things that we see.
Nordanon asked a couple of minutes ago if we could ever do a stream on Astrid Lindgren in the future, specifically Emil, since that's my favorite. Probably. We would probably have to bring on one of the Swedes to look into that, but that's very possible.
Yeah, I like that too. We should put that on the list.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's very good series, and of course there are quite a few adaptations to film. My favorites being Moomin and Bröderna Lejonhjärta, or the Brothers Lionheart, and they are quite nearly approaching high.
That's
high
a rough book. Yeah.
The Brothers Lionheart.
Yeah, that's a rough book, man.
Oh, yeah. I actually started shedding tears within the first 15 minutes, I think, of the film. That last time I saw it.
Yeah, and, I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Moomin is also very good, and maybe I should save the trivia for later, but
save it for that stream.
Yeah, some cool trivia regarding the film.
I think Ronja, the robber's daughter, is a pretty cool one as well.
That's a pretty cool one, good one as well, yeah. I think on that note, there doesn't seem to be any questions in the chat. I think we'll just end the stream here a bit early. If you enjoyed this and want to keep up to date with the Longhouse, we stream every week here on Thursdays. So like, subscribe, comment if you want to help us out. We also have a Matrix community that I usually link in the bottom along with my Twitter. Do any of you guys want to shill anything? Do you have any channels? Vingle, I know you post some artistic stuff.
Yeah, subscribe to Vingle as always is the message. I can't say I've uploaded a lot lately, but the Churchill versus Norway 1940 sort of I did the subtitles for it clip is still the latest one.
Yeah. Burkarl, sorry.
Yeah, I think people should mainly right now. I noticed Scrump and Evelyn are streaming about the very online right. So
do you have a link that you can go groip in the chat?
Yeah, I think the Longhouse should immediately raid this other stream and promote rapine and pillage, of course, as is custom.
Did you put it in the chat?
Yes.
I can't see it. Maybe I need to. Do I need to like allow it since it's a link?
Yeah.
Let me see here.
Be a problem, actually.
You can send it to me in the private chat, and I'll do it.
Yeah.
Ludwig, I know you post memes from time to time. Do you wanna
Yeah, I mean, I've soon surpassed this channel in subscribers, so I'm just going to jump off
That's true.
do the memes full time.
Apparently, creating Mr. Incredible memes about the right is more popular than whatever we were doing. So we're going to be rebranding the Walrus
that's
channel.
What we're going to happen. I'm going to absorb this channel, so it's just going to be like 3-second memes. It's going to be No, I'm not going to promote it. I don't think it has a lot of ideological value. I just wanted to do something simple where I could just try to gather up a lot of subscribers. I mean, my idea was originally to have like something similar to these channels, like the Kino Fabino and what's this other Luke Garino. Like you have a lot of these kind of like 3-second meme channels that are really, really popular. But I've noticed that a lot of them are just kind of slipping in this sort of subtle zoomer leftism in a lot of their memes. So I wanted to do something that was kind of like that, but I'm sort of like slipping in more of this kind of like right wing drip that is a continuous fixture in the stuff. So I've seen a lot of the people who have subbed to me.
You're radicalizing the lefties.
Pricing a lot of normies actually, who's like people who are subbed to Destiny and stuff like that, who are subscribed to me now. So I'm just going to keep dripping Spangler stuff into their feed and hope that it works. But yeah, I have nothing else to shill. I just thought we would talk about. I mean, the next week we're going to do the European history, the Scandinavian history special.
Yep. Hopefully, if Leo is recovered by then.
Yep. If not, then I think I have a few things in the chamber as well. I was thinking that I would do a stream where I would sit and talk about some of the culture on like some of the more 2000s culture, more inspired by. I mean, we talk about this kind of dissident right drama, the Adam and Sitch distributist saga. That I've looked through some of those videos. I mean, I don't. It's really just using that as a kind of launching point because if you look at the first video where they bring the distributist on, they ask Dave if he likes, I mean, do you like American culture? And he asks, well, what is American culture? Right? And they say, well, it's like Team America and that kind of stuff. So like, I mean, for the 2002 centrists, it is like, what do they think is culture? It was like 3 points that I basically, three movies or like three cultural products that I wanted to talk about. The first is like the Man Show. That is like that runs from like
that's the old Jimmy Kimmel stomping ride,
Joe Rogan, Adam Carolla thing. That absolutely sort of idiocracy, degenerate shit show, but it's very indicative of that time period. The second one would be Postal 2, like the video game and that series, and the third would be to look at some of these Sacha Baron Cohen movies, like Bruno and Borat, and some of the stuff that's going on around him. I mean, I could probably do a stream just on Sacha Baron Cohen alone and use that as a launch board to talk about this kind of J subversion tactics, because it's I mean, to me, a lot of these movies and the stuff that he's made, it's just kind of like a textbook on how to do like
what
J
Adam and
subversion.
Sitch are fighting against.
That's what they're fighting for.
Movies.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to preserve.
And the Man Show.
Yeah, the Man Show and Bruno. I mean, it's it is complete trash. But I catch myself, because I was a teenager and sort of in my early 20s when some of this stuff came out, that you would find me probably defending it, talking about free speech and the liberal values, and we need to kick the Muslims out because they're going to stop us from watching the Man Show or something like that. I mean, my thoughts are a little bit different, let's just say, at this point, where
a bit more mature, but I can understand it from my own point of view as well. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like just to finish off the point, almost like sort of one of the few positive side effects of this kind of like woke cancellation culture, that we don't get more Man Shows. I'm just sorry to put it that way, but I'm just kind of happy that I don't have to see more of this kind of crap on TV.
I need feminism to get rid of the Man Show.
Yes. They're right for the wrong reasons. But that's all I have. So hopefully we'll look forward to that.
So there's more coming here on the channel. So hope to see you again if you're you're in the chat, or I hope you'll be listening to us again. Now I'm going to post a link in the chat here. You can go gripe the scrumps, and hopefully I messed up the link here. I'll post it again. And hopefully you have a good evening and a good night. Bye-bye.